Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful Wednesday webinar. The wisdom being dispensed is by Dr. Ian Hare and Claudia Marcos-Sanchez from Sanchez Manrique, I hope I said it right, from the UK Communities Conference, which is an amazing gathering of intentional communities from all across the UK. It's part of, I think, some of the groups from the Diggers and Dreamers network, some of the older active community people know about Diggers and Dreamers. It's an amazing network of community groups all across the UK, intentional communities, co-ops and things. Really, we'll stick a link in the chat, check it out. And Ian and Claudia come to tell us more about the UK Communities Conference happening at Braziers Park, and get together of all of these communities to work out how we can all have more communities. So without too much further ado, over to us, Linda joining us, over to Ian. Thank you very much for coming, Ian and Claudia. Take it away.
All right, thanks, Phoenix. It's good to be able to come and speak about the Communities Conference to a new group of people that don't necessarily know about it yet. So, yeah, thanks for inviting us here. I thought I might start by saying a bit about what actually is a intentional community, because there might be some people who don't know. I think most people already know the term commune, but there's various different stereotypes associated with this word. So there's you might have a mental picture of brightly coloured people in the late 1960s smoking various substances, jumping into bed with each other all the time, not necessarily doing the dishes. And it's not that there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but there's lots of different types of communal living projects. They're doing lots of different things, and a lot of them want to use different terminology because they want to put a bit of distance between themselves and this this sort of stereotype that's floating around about communities. And on Wikipedia, there's a list of about 20 different terms that are used for communal projects. So things like utopian society, cooperative society, eco-village, intentional society, blah, 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 blah. Of these, intentional community is one of the most neutral and probably one of the more general terms. So this is the one that we use. There's not necessarily a set definition of intentional community. It's probably a bit contested. But what I often say is that it's any group of people seeking to live together in a way that reflects their values. You might think it's at least 3 people with some sort of common intention. Probably you'd say not all members of the same family, although yes, some people might contest that. And generally it's quite a broad definition. So personally, I'd include not only something like the kind of traditional commune where absolutely everything is shared, but also things like housing co-ops, things like more off-grid environmental projects, religious communities, things like the kibbutz, more new age projects like Findhorn in the northeast of Scotland, projects with political activistic intentions, artist communities, more modern setups like co-housing and so on and so forth. So it is a pretty broad category as we understand it. And there's examples of intentional communities that going back basically hundreds of years. So there were quite a few in the 19th century in the United States, for example, associated with the transcendental poets. Going back even further, there's things like the Diggers movement in the 17th century, who took over various bits of common land in England and tried to farm this on a radical kind of communal lines. So our conference focuses on intentional communities within the UK. So I think we're going to start by talking about a few examples of some of the different kinds of things that come under this umbrella. And at this point, I'm going to hand over to Claudia.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, I also, before we start with examples, as Ian was mentioned, communities are, we can say that they are a group of people that choose to live together because they have a common purpose. And most of the time in communities, they are related to sustainability. And we would like to point out that the relationship between communities and the environment is quite big because we think that most of the communities have a positive impact in how we take care of the environment. We have some of the examples of that, because when we live in community, there is more chances to sharing. You share water, you share food, you share energy. So we can reduce our footprint in the environment. We also, most of the communities that I have seen in the UK and also around the world, we have sustainable agricultural practices. Most of us practice permaculture, or we decided to go for growing organic food, and we also eat our own food. So we start to generate consciousness about the importance of that. Also, what I have seen is that some communities, when they buy the land, they kind of adopt that land and they try to preserve the nature in the way it is. And sometimes even they go further and they try to restore the land that they start to own. So that is also something beautiful that is happening around communities. We also see the education perspectives that communities have in the wider community around them. In most of the communities that I have lived, we usually have an open day. So we invite people that doesn't live in the community, but they come and visit us, and they usually start to get curious. And why do you do this? Why do you have a compost toilet? Why do you have a mud oven and things like that? Or why do you do your garden? And sometimes you even invite people, so they don't live in the community, but they come once a week. So they practice gardening with you. And we think there is also an extra point of the community living doing that. There is another practice that start in the UK. I have seen in some communities that they start to share the mobility. So instead, if you have 20 families, instead of have 20 cars, you start to share 4 or 6 cars, and you just have a schedule and you book your car. And there is many steps that communities are also taking into a positive impact around the environment. So with that said, we would like to talk about some kinds of communities, and we're going to start with the low impact communities. And I will talk one of my favorites in the UK, which is Tinker's Bubble. They are really, really radical. I was really lucky to be there in 2020, at the end of 2022. I was there for 2 weeks. I was a volunteer, and it was an amazing experience. Actually, they don't use any fuel. So when you want to cook, you just have to chop your own wood. We just do it in pairs because it's really hard if you're not used to that. So that's how you do your heating in your houses. That's how you cook. That is how you heat water to take a shower in the winter. It's a little bit extreme sometimes, but it's just beautiful. At the moment, there are around 6 people plus volunteers. They spend lots of times outdoors. They have a woodland, which is like 28 acres, and they take care of the woodland. They also have the permission to build their own houses. All their houses are eco houses. They make their own places, as long as they make a living from the land. So Tinker's Bubbles also, they grow their own food. They are organic certificated. They also produce cider, and they produce vinegar and apple juice. They try to also connect with the local community, and it's just one of the best experience. If you have the chance, they will have an open day, I think in October, but you can also check their website. And now I'm going back to Ian, who is going to talk a little bit of the big house.
Yeah, so one example of a different kind of community, place that I lived in for a couple of years, and Claudia did as well, is Braziers Park, which I'm now currently associated with as a trustee. This was set up in 1950. It was originally led by a psychiatrist who'd lived through World War I, and he was interested in basically finding new ways for people to live together that will be less likely to lead to conflict. People could work together a bit more harmoniously. Braziers is about 20 people living together in a kind of massive Gothic mansion, which you can see in the picture on the right. It's part of a loose group of communities which are often called big house communities, which were set up in the decades after the Second World War in former stately homes, which the owners could no longer afford to run. Some of those buildings got turned into things like schools or other organizations, and a lot also went on to become communities. It's worked in a few different ways over the years, Braziers, but currently we're generating our income as an adult education centre. So we're doing things like holding retreats, courses, hosting festivals, so on and so forth, and basically bringing people together to do stuff that's kind of aligned with our values, kind of alternative education. Most people who are living in Braziers Park are renting. In some big house communities, people have to buy in, which can make it a little bit harder to access. But at Braziers Park, that's not the case, so it's potentially a bit easier to join. And probably about half of the residents at Braziers work directly for the community in some way. So that might be organising events, or managing the estate, or making the beds after we've had guests, all of these different sorts of things. At any given time at Braziers, we probably have about half a dozen international volunteers from all different countries, which is another kind of tradition that reflects the values of the founders. So we got people from different languages, different continents, side by side, all working together, going all the way back to refugees from Germany after World War II who were based at Braziers in the 1950s. And we also grow a bit of our own food in our walled garden, but not nearly as much as they do at Tinker's Bubble. And I'm now going to hand back to Claudia, who's going to talk about one more example.
Thanks, Ian. Yes, and now we're going to move to Canon from Court, which is also known as a big house, but they are slightly different from Braziers Park. In Canon from Court, there is around 60 people divided into 19 families. They have single people living there, couples, and they also have families living there. What they do is they own their own space, but they have also the common expenses. The common spaces. Kind of from Court, they also are one of the biggest differences that I have seen is that they have two different entities inside of the community. They are a charity, but they also a co-op. So they grow lots of vegetables. They try to process most of the things that they eat. They also have a special kitchen that is dedicated only to them. They make their own cheese, their own yogurt, and then pasteurize the meal. So the way that they work is also a very interesting one. In the cooperative farming, most of the people that doesn't work outside, they have like a schedule and they run and they support each other in how to run in the farming and the other projects that they have in the community. They also have their own meat and they work together to make all of this happen. In my perspective, it's a great community that have find a way to be sustainable and also keep themselves separate, but also enjoy of the community life together. So it's also beautiful to see. They also open for volunteers during the summer. So if any of you would like to go and visit Canon from Court, is another good example. And one of the things that I probably like most is they managed to get solar panel energy in the last few years. I was visiting there also in 2023, and they were really happy to get that managed and kind of controlled. So yes, those are the examples that we brought today about some communities, but there is, as Ian was mentioning, hundreds only in the UK and much more in the world. So now we're going back to Ian.
Yeah, so hopefully those examples give you some sense of some of the different things out there. But yeah, as Claudia was saying, we reckon there's probably at least a couple of hundred different intentional communities in the UK of various different kinds. And one of the main resources for people that don't know about this already to find out more is Diggers and Dreamers. It's a publishing collective who operate what's mostly now an online directory, although they do print copies too. And that's got locations, shared values, contact information, ways to join, so on and so forth. And Diggers and Dreamers have also done quite a lot of work with us to help us promote our conference and raise awareness of it. So yeah, big shout out to them for that support as well. So then the next question is, why should we care about all this? Like, why are intentional communities important, potentially interesting? So my own interest was basically sparked by a visit that I made to Twin Oaks community in the US. That was 2011. It's a rural community. There's about 100 people living there. And they're quite radical. So they're completely income sharing. Absolutely all of their income is distributed equally between the different members. And they also have a kind of feminist division of labor. So everybody's asked to work the same number of hours, and things like childcare are counted equally alongside work that brings in money. So that was kind of built into their approach from the beginning. And like some of the others we've mentioned, it's also, from an environmental perspective, it's a place where everybody's pooling their resources. So what they said to me is, on paper, they're living way below the poverty line, but they're actually quite comfortable. All of their needs are pretty well met. They're probably getting maybe in some, probably in most ways a better social life than someone that lives by themselves in a flat or in a house on their own. And there's quite a lot else I could probably say about that experience, but for me, I was 18 years old. I'd grown up in a fairly kind of typical suburban environment, living in a more individualistic way, more kind of consumer capitalist way, with the sense that like this is wrong in some way, like all of these resources are being wasted. It doesn't really speak to many of the things that I feel are important to me. But before I'd visited Twin Oaks, I think it had never occurred to me that a group of people could get together and kind of walk out and do something else. So I just remember being there and having this sense of astonishment at realizing that something else was actually possible.
So Ian, just a quick question there. You got Twin Oaks Community Conference and there's a UK Community Conference. How long's the Twin Oaks one been going? Is it similar? Are they getting US groups together at that community conference?
Yeah, I'll get back to that a bit later.
Cool.
But it's our direct inspiration is the Twin Oaks conference. They've been going about 20 years, I think, or maybe more.
Okay. Welcome, Skylar. Carry on.
Yeah, but no, don't get the two confused. That is a good point. So thanks for coming in. Yeah, and so probably I would have had a similar experience if I'd visited Tinker's Bubble first, or if I'd visited some other community first. But yeah, basically, I think what all of these different communities have in common is when you visit them, you can see in quite a radical way that our kind of common mainstream way of doing things is not the only way, and that there are alternatives. And it's true both in terms of like the obvious practical side, so 20 people sharing one huge freezer and cooking together, obviously use less resources. But it's also true in more subtle ways, because if you're living in a big group of people, you're kind of pushed into this negotiation where everybody has slightly different temperaments, slightly different perspectives, different values and things like that. And there's a constant interesting and rewarding challenge to settled ways of doing things. So having visited Twin Oaks, I decided I wanted to learn a bit more. And since then, I've traveled around and I visited maybe 20 communities in the UK, in different parts of the world. And I've been looking for other ways to inspire others and get people basically interested in this. And now I'm going to hand back to Claudia again.
Thanks. Well, why I'm doing this in communities, as you might note already, I'm not from the UK. I'm actually from Peru. When I was living here from a very young age, we start to visit what we call communities here, but you probably call them slums. Here in Peru, we have this problem in the 80s, 70s with terrorism. Lots of people migrate to the little hills that we have outside the main city, which is Lima, the capital. When I start to grow up, I start to work in social projects, and I used to visit them every Sunday, and I noticed how much they organize themselves in order to survive. They have these meetings every Sunday, really early in the morning, and after this meeting, they resolve which problems they want to focus on, and they start the projects of building. They will build in the stairs, they will be in the common houses, they will be in the schools. They also was carrying water because there was a problem with water there. So I grew up with this idea that you need to live together because you must. It's the only way to survive. Actually, never occurred to me that you could choose this way of living until I was on my 30s. I remember that my child was asking me to go to a different place because he just wanted to go something different. And a friend told me about this place, Sierra Langia, which is an ecovillage here in Peru. And as soon as I arrived there, I noticed, people was really happy. I didn't understand what was going on there. And I remember falling asleep, and I woke up and I panicking, oh, where's my child? Where's my child? And the other moms started like, hey, relax, it's with us, we have you there. And it suddenly came to my mind, yes, this also happened, some other people can help you to co-parenting. And I start to see, and everything suddenly have sense in my life, how they were organizing, how they live together, how they grow food together, how they raise their child, how they share responsibilities. And it was overwhelmed, the feeling that I have on the first visit into this place. And it was like, it brings many stereotypes that I have in my head. And I guess from that time, like almost 10 years ago, I knew that that was the way that I wanted to live, was the way that I think it's worth it to live in that way. You know, when you share, when you have more people to hold you. There's many other things that actually bring me into this kind of life, but that was the first touch to feel that I could share my life with others in an open heart way, what actually got me into. Since then, I've been traveling a lot around the world, mostly in South America and Europe. I visit all different kind of communities and trying to find what is the one that actually is more aligned with my values. And it's hard because most of them are, so I just need to make my pick at some point. But yeah, so far we're just working to try to make more people to know what living in a community is and the opportunities that they will find there. So yeah, that was my inspiration to start working with Ian at this conference in the UK.
Yeah. So what is the conference? It's an annual weekend gathering, or I should say we're hoping that it's going to be annual. We've done 2 of them, and the 3rd edition is going to be at the end of July this year. The first 3 have been running at Braziers Park in Oxfordshire, where we used to live. And it's modelled, as Phoenix was asking about a little bit earlier on a similar conference which takes place at Twin Oaks in the States. And the intention is basically to try and build a social movement around these various different little practical experiments or practical attempts to live in a different way. There's 2 intentions. So the first one is that people who already live in communities can come along and share knowledge about how to do it. As I mentioned, there's a lot of variation in the different types, but communities are often struggling with similar issues. So things like taking collective decisions, sharing resources, managing conflict, how you stay true to your values. And because of all of these common threads, I think communities have quite a lot of knowledge to share. And then the second purpose is for people that don't know about communities to come along and learn a bit more about what's out there and what it is. So that might be someone who's living by themselves or in a kind of house share, is kind of thinking they want to do something different, but they're not necessarily sure what there is, can come along and see, like, these are the possibilities that you might follow up on instead. So because of these intentions, we normally have about half our participants, people who are already community residents, and probably about half people who are curious, not involved yet, or just getting involved. In terms of what's on the program, there's quite a mix of different things. So typically we have a few talks where people will come and give an introduction to their community and what they do. We might have a talk on something like conflict management. Usually we'll have a few things that are a bit more fun. Sometimes things that are more practical. Last year we had scything workshops and making hay and things like that. And there's always a bonfire and a bit of a dance in the evening to make a bit of a fun and communal event in itself, rather than just information, to give you a sense of the feeling of what it's like to be in a communal environment at the conference. And I think Claudia is going to talk a bit about our different themes in the first couple of years.
Yes, thanks, Ian. So yeah, the first year it was kind of an experiment. I remember when Ian just came to the community, we were living at Braziers Park at that moment, and he bring the idea and it was, okay, how are we going to do this? And it was beautiful because there was lots of communities sharing. It was the first time that we were running and we were bringing the community to a place together. So they started to make presentations of how do they live, the benefits of living in community. The first objective, remember, that just for us was let's try to promote, to encourage people to make this movement a little bit more stronger, people to know each other, to know that there is other communities. And for people that is not living in a community, just get together and see what's going on around here in the UK. After this first year, we have some feedback forums and we start to share also with people that wasn't from Braziers, because it's important to mention that the first year it was mostly holding by people who was living with us. They were residents. We were almost all of us holding this event. But for the second year, we swapped. We actually have an organizer team. And this organizer team was from people from Tinker's Bubble, Alex DeGood, and Chris Taylor from Conf. And we remind 3 of us from Braces that we were living there at the moment. We decided to put a specific theme for the second edition, and that was skills. How do we share skills to live in community? We divided it into 4 areas. That was the interpersonal skills, the organizational, the practical, and the ecological ones. And it was beautiful. We feel that we have a different structure. Because the first year, also, sorry if I go back and forward, it was most of showcases. But for the second year, because of the feedback forms, we realized that people also wanted to do some workshops. They wanted to put their hands in the ground. They want to see how do we work with compost. They want to garden in a bit. We even made a sighting workshop. So that was something beautiful to happen. And for this year, as soon as we finished the second conference, I remember that it was Sunday in the afternoon, and one of our organizers had to leave. He needed to come back to Canon from Kurt. And we sit to make our feedback session. How do we feel after we finish the conference? And it immediately came to us that we wanted to work something around expression. How do we express ourselves? How do we put outside what is inside of us? And how is this been happening in communities? Because that is also the beauty of living together, to living with other people, that you have more chances to show yourself as you really are, to put outside what is happening inside of you. And it doesn't have to be in words necessarily. You can sing, you can make a poem, you can just perform. Even if you're just angry, you have spaces in community. Most of communities have different activities like forums or meetings, so they allow you to put out things. So we came with the idea to the theme of this year is going to be expression, and expression in a really broad way, not necessarily artistic. So that is how we're going to timeline the conference, and we're looking forward for also seeing what's going to happen in the coming years. Now, Ian, you want to mention something?
Oh yeah, yes, no. So one extra thing we're doing as well this year that we haven't done the first couple of years is we're also collaborating with the Intentional Communities Research Group at Cardiff Met. So that's run by an academic called Kirsten Stevens-Wood. And she's leading an online symposium, which is going to take place in the evenings. And that's going to have a bit more of a research on intentional communities angle. So anybody that's interested in that can sit and join the online symposium. It's sort of another string to our bow for the 2024 conference.
Thanks. Just before we close, we would like also to let you know how you can get involved with the conference. Of course, everybody is welcome to come this year and join us as a participant. The conference this year is gonna have one extra day. The previous year it was from Friday to Sunday. This year is gonna be from Thursday to Sunday. 18th of July, we're gonna start. We also invite people to be speakers. This year we have the call out from January to March. Now it's closed. Sorry if anybody's like dying to make a workshop, but you can do it next year. We also invite people who want to join the organizers teams from the following editions. We're gonna have that space. And if you're already living in a community or you just own a big land and you think you can host the community conference, please also get in contact with us, because at the moment we have been done the 3 editions at Braces Park, but we really want this conference to be moving around the UK and have different perspectives from different lands and etc. You can also be a sponsor, because the UK is a non-profit organization. We would like to be able to bring more people, people with low income, so people who might not be able to afford a ticket. We would like to have that opportunity. So if you would like to be a sponsor, you're really welcome. And finally, if you cannot come and you cannot be organized because of time or other things, we also want to be really, really happy if you can help us with the promotion. Just spread the word that this is happening and we're going to have this event and people can join us in different ways. So we left there some contact details. There is our email, our webpage, and the job form if you would like to book some tickets for the conference.
Brilliant. Maybe we can post the email and the tickets link into the chat so that people can see it there and take it on a network. Yeah. Wow, absolutely brilliant, guys. That's really a journey around the community in the UK and America and Peru. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for that. It's really just taking us on a journey, and I'm sure there's a few questions and things out there. Just to, if Ian, is that good? Do you want to flow into questions or?
Yeah, very happy to take any questions.
Okay, folks. So if you do have any questions, it doesn't have just to be a question. It could be a, oh, that's Miguel Herrera beaming in. Chris, can you let them in or not? What's to say? Yeah. So down the bottom, there is a little reactions button there that you can raise a hand like that, and then we can see who's 1, 2, 3. If people want to say something, it can be a comment, it can be feedback, it can be a question, anything you want. Hello, Miguel Herrera. Welcome. We've just had some of the presentation. We're going to go to questions and feedback. So yeah, stick your hand up if you want to say something. Just a little bit on the Diggers and Dreamers network. So that actually started in like '89, was it? And how is the link between the Diggers and Dreamers network and the UK Communities Conference? Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so Diggers and Dreamers have been going a really long time, several decades. I don't know exactly what year. But even before Diggers and Dreamers in the 70s, there was Communes Network and various organizations that developed into Diggers and Dreamers all the way back then. We're a separate project, so when I first kind of conceived of this, I knew that Diggers and Dreamers existed, but I hadn't spoken to any of them. But clearly we've got some quite similar aims in terms of wanting to share about intentional community in Britain and promote this. And every year, I think quite a few of the Diggers and Dreamers have been there. They usually help us promote on their mailing list. Sometimes they do a couple of talks. Yeah, so we're kind of in loose collaboration, but they're not. And none of the people in Diggers and Dreamers are also co-organizers of the conference. They're separate groups in that way.
Have you linked to like the cooperative movement as well and the eco-village network? I know there's a global eco-village network and a UK one. Do you link them in, co-ops particularly?
We've had a couple of talks from people living in housing co-ops in the past couple of years. I've reached out to some of the networks like Radical Roots and things like that. I've sent emails to, but we haven't built any kind of close network with them so far. If anybody's more involved with housing co-ops and wants to link up, like please do write to us and we'll see how you can get more involved either this year or next year.
Okay. That's definitely. I went to a co-ops conference, I think in Sheffield, and I've got contacts for all the.
Yeah.
Maybe pass them on. So any other questions or feedback there? Hello, Sarah Banks in sunny Durham. Over.
If only it was sunny, but anyway, a very inspirational talk. It's amazing how many types of communities there are. And you've obviously had a lot of experience visiting them, but also staying in them, but seeing the people at the conferences. And obviously they're very diverse, but do you feel there are some ingredients that for an intentional community to work well, what are the key features it would need to have? Or is it just so diverse that you can't really say anything like that?
Claudia, I don't know if you want to take this one.
Yes. Well, actually, with Ian, we were having this question for a year or so. We find this book, Living a Life Together. It was for Diana Christian Leaf, I think. And yes, there is some components that you need to have when you live together. One of them is great communication. Doesn't have to be a communication skill, but be open to share how do you feel and negotiate. Be really open to negotiations, because you have some values and they are not going to change, but the rest of things you need to be kind of adaptable. The also other important things that you need to have, or it's recommended to have, a decision-making process in a community from the very beginning. So you know how you're going to make the decisions and nobody's going to get mad when things are happening. And you're also going to avoid power issues inside the community. Another thing that we noticed that is really important is something that you can call the glue, what bring us together, you know. So give yourself time to share, to enjoy, to do things that are not only work, especially at the beginning when you're just starting to set up a community. There is lots of working, maybe in the building, in the cleaning, in the gardening, but you need to make and stop and actually do things that you're enjoying together. But that's what it's gonna keep you during the years. I don't know, Ian, if you have more things maybe you want to share.
Yeah, I think the only other one that I can think of off the top of my head is trying to make sure that you're clear on what your intention is. Like it can sometimes happen that a community sets up and they want to do this and they want to do that, and then time passes, 20, 30 years later, some of the sense of focus might start to fade away, and that can be a challenge. So having some way to kind of collectively reinforce, like this is what we're doing this for, either by like might be a weekly shared practice of some kind, or you might have like a list of your values up somewhere, so that people don't end up losing sight of why they were doing it in the first place, which is often when these sorts of projects can drift apart. So that kind of holding of values, I think, is important as well.
Thank you.
Very good question there. I think Hugo had a question there, and I'm wondering whether Hugo's deep adaptation kind of project, the research, is that on Diggers and Dreamers, Hugo? And if you want to ask your question, unmute.
Hi, sorry. Yeah, I'm probably not in a place where I can ask. Sorry, so put it in the chat. But not on Diggers and Dreamers. No, we're below the radar.
Okay, maybe he's got a bit of background noise with kids or stuff, I think there. So his question was, for Brazier's part, what is the formal setup? Is the house a HMO, which I think is house of multiple occupancy, other, or is the land use categorized as residential or other? Do you know more stuff about that, Ian? You're a trustee, or?
Yeah, I mean, Brazier's setup is quite complicated. I don't want to go on for too long necessarily, but formally we are a community benefit society. So it's owned by a group of members. There's about 50 or 60 members, not all of which are residents, most aren't. And formally speaking, that wider membership is kind of holding the value of the purpose of the project in a way. And then the trustees are elected from that wider membership. And then the trustees kind of have ultimate control, but most of that is delegated on a day-to-day basis to the community meeting, which is comprised mainly of residents and people that work within the community who take the kind of more practical decisions on most things. So it's got that kind of double setup. I think in some ways it's a little bit awkward to have these kind of two centers of governance, but at the same time, I think some communities that are structured as charities and have trustees, it can happen that you just have a small group. You can get rogue trustees, carpetbaggers, things like that taken over. And because we have our like wider membership that elects the trustees, I think that's also protected us in a way from some of those risks. That's part of why Brazier's has lasted 75 years and some other communities have not. In terms of land use, I'm not sure what we are formally, but obviously it's a big country house, lots of people living there. No locks on the door, so it's probably not an HMO.
Okay, I hope that helped. But Hugo, I think Skylar was in next with a question, and then maybe I think back to Hugo's got another question there, which is good. It's all Skylar, do you want to ask that question?
Oh, all right. Hi. I was just wondering if it was possible to do more volunteer shifts for a reduced ticket price, or to just be a volunteer for a free ticket.
Thanks, that's a great question. Actually, at the moment, yeah, this conference, the setup of this year is going to be that also the holder tickets, they are going to help us to run the conference. So at the moment, everybody that is going to help us with some shift. That's what we decided to do this year, to try to keep the price. We haven't increased almost nothing from last year, even from the first year. So that's what we're doing. And we also are taking some volunteers, but because it's a really small conference, they are already full. We already have a waiting list for people who want to collaborate with us. But yeah, thanks.
Yeah, I should add that there's different rates in terms of ticket price. So for people where affordability might be an issue, there is a reduced rate you can pay half. What
is that half rate then? So there's that 55 is the half rate, or is it half of that?
There's different rates depending on whether you're living in community or not. If you are, it's 110.55. If you're not, it's 140.70. That's to incentivize people that are living in communities to come, particularly when they're often in situations where they might have a bit less money. That's our current structure.
Okay. All right. Well, there's always a will, there's a way. If you get in touch, I'm sure Skylar, there's always possibilities on a lot of things. It's always good to get in touch and have a chat with people and see what can be worked out. I think Hugo's got a question there again. Maybe he's got background noise, but is anyone aware of intentional communities? This is his question, whose main thrust is to provide people with experiences into this more communal way of living, rather than the priority being that of providing a place to live for the permanent residents. For example, this is in the chat, where most of the accommodations actually for short-term visitors rather than long-term livers. So is there a kind of training place for short-term community living rather than long-term residents? That's an interesting question, Hugo. How to learn about communal living on a short term?
Well, I think Braziers Park, where I was living, is probably one of the. I mean, most communities, or many communities, I should say, do take volunteers. So you can go for 2 weeks or 2 months or 3 months and work there and learn a bit more about it. But yeah, Braziers Park, where I used to be based, as I mentioned, we've got like 6 volunteers typically at any given time. And that's constantly changing over. So someone will come and have that experience and then move on and do something else. But yeah, in practice, there's a lot of different places where you can do that. Tinker's Bubble also takes volunteers. Cannon Fruit takes volunteers. All of these places is usually some way to come and spend a bit of time. So I think that's a need that's well met.
Okay, yeah,
sorry, I just wanted to add that it will depend of the community. How do they want to live? There is some communities that they prefer to have more residential people. For example, Cannon from Court, they buy their place and they live there. And when they decided to move, they also go through a process to sell again that property that they own inside of the community. So all the community have to approve. So they have volunteers that come and go, but the main community live together most of the time. So you have the opportunity also to choose in which way you want to live. And it will depend on how you set up your community or which community do you join.
Yeah, and it's probably worth adding to that a community where there's a lot of turnover, different volunteers coming and going, people living for a year, 2 years at a time, is going to feel very different to a community of 50 people where, one person moves out every like 6 months or a year and the rest are stable. So it's a different experience. Yeah, but both potentially like quite rewarding depending on what you want.
Interesting. Being a student of setting up communities all my life and been involved with setting up various different communities and spaces, personally, I'm always really interested in how communities run, how the meetings are structured, how, non-hierarchical or circular, or, how their meeting structures are. And I think we've got a lot to learn from all different communities and, our usual, whatever you want to call it, top-down pyramidal way of decision making has affected the planet in a lot of ways, and we need to learn from community and from tribal societies and indigenous societies about how they make decisions and how we work things out. A lot of our communities for years, we set one up years ago called the Circle Community, and I remember pushing early on about consensus, and people were like, why is he going on about consensus? Why can't we just vote on this? And obviously voting also pushes aside the thoughts of the minority, and it takes longer consensus, but you do get a broader decision that's more discussed and worked out, and there's also issues with consensus as well about time and all sorts of things. But all of these communities are really good to check out Diggers and Dreamers, because there are so many groups there that are experimenting with a lot of different ways, and you can contact them and you can ask them how are you run, how are you set up, how can I come and spend a couple of days and visit. So yeah, do pop your hand up for any other questions or feedback or anything there. Hugo saying, is there a land use argument here, or could be a lively debate? Is there a land use argument to say that if everyone lived in this way, we would run out of land? A George Monbiot line of thought. Well, we did have the Right to Roam guy on saying that Nick Hayes a little while ago, Trespass, saying that the British public only has access to about 6% of the land and 4% of riversides. And there is a big discussion there. What do we think? What does the panel think on the question there? It's in the chat. Is there a land use argument here to say if everyone lived in the way we would run out of land? Well, I think we could share a little more. Chris.
Important to learn how to look after it first. You go to your local park on the first day of summer, and I'm grateful that people don't have access to moorland. All the little bags and barbecues and things that you find lying around, you go for a walk in the woods. Yeah, I think we need to learn. I mean, you look at some Northern European countries where they're encouraged from an early age to learn how to live next door, to go camping and the rest of it. They're allowed to have fires, and I believe it can be done, but I believe it takes we need to educate before we can release, I believe. Yeah. Also, we've got a lot less land per person than a lot of other large countries. And yeah, my thoughts.
Okay, that's good to hear. Any other thoughts there? There's a very uneven land distribution in this country. That figures 5% of the population owns 75% of the land, and there needs to be some sharing somewhere. Any other thoughts there? Feedback? Anyone? Questions?
I feel like this one about land is a tough one. I don't know enough about farming and agriculture necessarily, but I do think my possible rebuttal would be I don't know like how much land I'm using at the moment. If you count all of the farmland that's being used to grow some sort of like monocrop cereals and stuff that are being used to feed me for my breakfast when I'm not living in community. So like there's a question, yeah, are we going to run out of land? Are we going to run out of land anyway? I don't necessarily see intentional communities as something that's going to make that worse. But I'd be interested to hear from anybody who's got like more knowledge on that, for sure.
Okay, I think that's a very large debate and discussion to pop in right towards the end of the webinar. But I think it's an ongoing one that we all need to look at and look at what's going on with the land distribution, who really owns it, and access to it. I think there's a Right to Roam campaign. We should pop that in the chat. We're looking to do a few more things, and land workers alliance groups like that. Emily, I know you've got to go soon. We're finishing soon. Any thoughts or feedback there from the filmmaking team?
No, it's all really interesting. I was involved in a project that tried to get off the ground years ago and it didn't get off the ground, and I'd love to always sort of remain curious and interested. So thanks for all of the information today.
That's good. Well, it'll be interesting to hear about what that project was at some point. All of the ones are learnings from all of them. Maybe I wondered how you found out about this, whether it was a text or a or something else, Emily. I think I've got a number for you somewhere.
Oh my goodness. It's so difficult to recall. I think it was on one of the many WhatsApp groups that I'm on. Somebody must have posted it.
Okay, cool. Well, we'd love you to come and do a webinar at some point, but I think I've got a contact for your number, so I'll text you about that. That would be great.
No worries.
Yeah. Filmmaking. All right. Okay, folks. Well, we're coming towards the end of our kind of 8 o'clock kind of thing, but any more thoughts, feedback or anything there? We will encourage everybody to book a ticket. I think the ticket link is in there for the UK Communities Conference. Really reach out to any of your friends, relatives, or other people who wants to find out anything more about the UK Communities Conference or Diggers and Dreamers or Braziers. I think there's a couple of other good links we should put in there. The eco-village network is quite a big one. There's a global eco-village network. Met a Chinese lady recently who's come over to do writing about sustainability, and end up looking, there's actually about 10 different eco-villages in China. This is a movement all over the world where people are trying to experiment with how they can live, how can they live in community, and living in community uses so much, less resources. I've lived in communities sometimes in my life of 20, 25, 30 plus people, and sometimes I've lived in a flat on my own or a canal boat on my own or whatever it is. And there's a massive difference between the amount of resources you use and a lot of different factors, you know, how you feel, how you interrelate with other people. I think we are tribal beings. I think we like to be around other people sometimes and have our own space, but community is a beautiful thing and we need to create it more often, and come to the UK Communities Conference and find out more. Any other quick questions or feedback, or otherwise we'll come back to Ian and Claudia for final stages, and just encourage everyone to book a ticket and come along. It should be fantastic. Nice one, Helmi. All right, so over to Ian and Claudia for final comments there. We're coming up to our hour. Thank you very, very much for coming. We've got a lot of thought-provoking stuff out there about community, and I hope many more communities can get created from this conference, and we'll network the webinar out. Ian, Claudia, final sharings, over.
Ian,
yeah, I think you kind of said it for us just now. It's if you want to be involved, please do book a ticket, write to us, get in touch, look on the website, and yeah, get involved. Anything else from you, Claudia?
Yes, I would encourage you just to try the experience. Even if you cannot come to the conference, just go into the Diggers and Dreamers. There is a directory, and you have all the different types of communities, and just give yourself the chance. There could be just a day, an open day experience, or could be a few days voluntary, or could be a week's voluntary, but it's just something, it's a life-changing experience, to be honest. So go for it.
Brilliant. All right, go for it, folks. It really is a life-changing experience. It's great to see, Claudia, the pictures of the Peruvian community there and stuff. So as a parting one, anybody would like to put 1, 2, or 3 words into the chat of what they thought tonight, just as we beam out, or if you want a quick check out words, anything you thought. Debs, want to say anything, what you thought? It's on mute.
Yeah, interesting, thank you. I know a few people do it in Wales. There's a few, isn't there? Like commune living and that. I don't know if it's the same thing. It's interesting though, like big stately homes and that, because empty ones and that's worth looking into, isn't it?
Yeah.
I'm gonna put something in chat.
Have a look on Save Britain's Heritage. There's a load of empties on there. We had a Spanish speaker join us, Miguel Hare. I noticed somebody's shifted captions to Spanish. I don't know, Miguel, if you want to say a parting comment or anything. I'm not sure if Claudia's other language is Spanish.
Yeah. I might not be able to.
Well, thank you. Well, very inspiring. I'm glad I could watch the last part.
All right, guys, lovely. All right, so yeah, pop a comment in the chat if you want, and we shall see you next week for another wonderful Wednesday webinar. Thank you so much to Ian and Claudia. Absolutely inspiring. Let's hope that many more people link and find community. Save the chat down the bottom if you want some of these web links. And I should pop in Globally Co-Village Network and the other one. All right, I'm going to stop the recording now. Anybody wants to stay around for a little chat, they can. Or if you've got to beam off and get your tea, that's fine. Stop the recording